This nightmare happened about 10 years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was living back at my parents' house after college, staying in the small guest room upstairs. It wasn't much, just a tiny space above the garage that shook every time someone opened the garage door. But it was private and quiet, which I appreciated. That Friday night, I was completely alone. My brother was at a work conference in Baltimore, and my parents had gone to their shore house for the weekend, like they did every summer. I was exhausted from a brutal day at work, so I decided to stay in, order some food, and call it an early night. Around 11:30, I was lying in bed reading when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of our garage door opening. The familiar vibration shook my floor for the full 10 seconds it took the door to rise. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then reality hit me like a brick wall. Nobody should have been coming home. My heart started pounding as the realization sunk in. I jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. The garage door was definitely open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car inside or who might have opened it. I grabbed an old baseball bat from my closet and quietly made my way downstairs. I was trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe my parents forgot something. Maybe my brother's plans changed. Maybe the door malfunctioned. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the bedroom area of the house. Faint, but definitely there. At least two people talking in hushed tones. That's when I knew for certain someone had broken into our house. I called 911, whispering our address and telling them about the break-in. The operator told me to stay hidden and wait for police, but I felt this overwhelming urge to protect my family's home. Against all common sense, I decided to confront the intruders. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles went white. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear drawers being opened and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for valuables. I took a deep breath and made what was probably the stupidest decision of my life. I started yelling at the top of my lungs and charged into the room with the bat raised above my head. Two men were rummaging through my mother's closet. They both shouted in shock when I burst through the door. They clearly hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me a brief moment of confidence, despite being outnumbered. I swung the bat at the closer man, connecting hard with his leg. He cursed and fell over, clutching his injury. But before I could turn to the second guy, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me to the ground. This guy was significantly larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat away easily and got his hands around my throat, choking me. I was clawing at his hands, fighting for my life, when I saw the first guy crawling toward us with what looked like a knife in his hand. In that moment, I realized I'd made a grave mistake. I was going to die in my parents' bedroom, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then I heard the beautiful sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember is the second guy picking up my own baseball bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black. When I woke up, a police officer was kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused with a raging headache, but I was alive. The bedroom door to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had knocked me unconscious and fled when they heard the sirens. The paramedics checked me over, but I refused to go to the hospital. I gave the police a detailed statement, though they told me the suspects were long gone by the time they arrived. When I called my parents and brother, they were furious at me for being stupid enough to confront armed burglars. They were right. If I'd just hidden like the operator told me to, the police might have caught them. The men were never found, despite the police canvassing the neighborhood. My parents installed a comprehensive security system the moment they got home. But here's what really bothered me about the whole situation. All our doors were locked that night. The only way to open the garage was with a button my dad had programmed as a wireless switch in our car. There was no way random strangers would know about that button, and I never locked the car in our driveway. Even more disturbing was the timing. They somehow knew my parents would be away for the weekend and that my brother was out of town.
Whoever broke in that night knew our family well enough to know our routines and where to find that garage door opener. My dad became really paranoid after that, convinced that whoever had broken in was someone close to our family. We never did figure out who it was. That night changed something in me. There's a difference between life before and after you've accepted you're going to die. I can still remember that feeling of thinking it was the end. It's something that stays with you forever.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you dare to hear more chilling stories. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken by how calculated and personal it was. I had recently moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother. She lives about 20 minutes away from my new duplex, close enough to get there quickly if needed, but far enough that I still had my independence. My mom has been having health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but she's had a few minor falls, and she's stubborn about accepting help. I've been trying to convince her to get a medical alert system, but she insists she doesn't need one. It's been a constant source of stress, knowing she's alone most of the time. On this particular evening, I was settling in for the night around 9 p.m., watching TV on the couch, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize, but since I was new to the area, I figured it might be important. A woman identified herself as a nurse at the local emergency room. She said my mother had been brought in about an hour ago after taking a fall and hitting her head. According to her, my mom was conscious but asking for me, and they wanted to know if I could get to the hospital quickly. I was horrified. This was exactly the call I'd been dreading since moving back. The woman knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned her recent hip replacement surgery from a few months ago. I didn't doubt the legitimacy of the call for 1 second. I immediately stopped what I was doing and said a silent prayer, trying to stay calm. I didn't even think about locking up the house. I just grabbed my keys, pulled the front door shut, and raced to my car. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. I kept running through worst-case scenarios in my head. When I got to the ER, I rushed up to reception and told them I was there for my mother, giving her her name and explaining about the call. The nurse looked confused and checked her computer. Then she told me there was no record of anyone by that name being admitted or treated that evening. I insisted there had to be some mistake since I'd just gotten a call from someone claiming to be a nurse there. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. They had no record of my mother and suggested I try calling her directly to make sure she was okay. I stepped outside and called my mom's landline. She answered, groggy from sleep, wondering why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was checking up and told her to go back to bed. That's when the heart-sinking realization hit me. This had been a setup. Someone had deliberately given me false information to get me out of my house. I jumped back in my car, furious that I'd been tricked so easily. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door was still closed, just like I'd left it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was being paranoid and nothing had happened. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The house had been completely ransacked. My TV was gone, along with my laptop and the small jewelry collection I kept in my bedroom. But as I looked around more carefully, I realized the thieves had taken some really strange things too. Family photos had been removed from their frames. Not the frames themselves, just the actual photos. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet had been emptied and taken. They had stolen things with relatively little monetary value, but huge sentimental value to me. It was sadistic. There's no reason a normal thief would take family photos. There just isn't. I called the police immediately, but I already felt defeated. The thieves were long gone, and there was nothing anyone could do. I told the officers everything, remembering the phone call verbatim. After hearing it, they reached the same conclusion I had. Whoever had called knew things about my mother and me that no stranger could possibly know. For the life of me, I couldn't come up with a list of people who would have that information or how someone could have gotten it in the first place. The theft itself was bad enough, but the fact that they targeted family photos and medical information suggested this wasn't just about quick cash. I couldn't shake the feeling they were planning something longer term.
possibly identity theft or some other scheme requiring personal documentation. Over the next few weeks, nothing else happened. I'm pretty confident my mother is the source of the information leak. She has a lot of friends for a woman her age, and knowing her, she probably said too much to the wrong person. I've warned my mother about giving out personal information, and she's finally agreed to be more careful. But I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched by someone who knows way too much about our lives and isn't finished with whatever they're planning. I recently got a Ring camera, so hopefully that's enough of a deterrent. If anything else happens, I'll update this story.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you dare to hear more chilling stories. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, living alone in this rented house for over a year now. It's a nice little place in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, but comfortable with reasonable rent. I'd really made it feel like home. The incident happened on a Thursday night around 11 p.m. I was getting ready for bed when I heard aggressive pounding on my front door. Not knocking, actual pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. I looked out the window but couldn't see much because of how poorly positioned the porch light is. Despite not being able to see who it was and the aggressiveness of the knocking, I'm a pretty buff guy, so I wasn't scared, more irritated and confused than anything. I opened the front door but kept the screen door shut as protection. What I saw was surprising, to say the least. There was this extremely agitated man standing there, maybe a few years older than me, average height, disheveled hair, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been slept in for multiple nights. But what really caught my attention was how angry and unstable he seemed. His eyes were darting around, he was breathing heavily like he'd been running or having a panic attack, and he was pacing like he couldn't keep still. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he started yelling that this was his house and demanding I let him in. He said I was trespassing and threatened to call the police if I didn't get out immediately. I thought he was either on drugs or having some kind of mental health crisis, maybe both. I tried to calm him down and explain that he had the wrong house, but he became even more agitated. That's when he started rattling off details about the house that made me freeze up. He knew things about the house that you couldn't observe from outside, details that only someone who had actually lived there would know. He knew that the master bedroom door is poorly designed and bangs into the toilet. He knew that the back door sticks and you have to lift it slightly while turning the doorknob. There were other details too, but I can't remember them all. I just stood there in shock, not saying anything. But that was only the beginning. It was about to get much weirder. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started showing me documentation. He had what appeared to be a lease agreement with his name on it, dated from about 6 months before I'd moved in. He had pieces of mail addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though I suspected it had been forged somehow. But the most unsettling part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos. They were pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my current couch watching TV, cooking in my kitchen, even lying in what was now my bedroom. The photos looked recent and completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and most included other people I'd never seen before. He showed me one photo he claimed was from this past 4th of July, just a few months ago. It was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, the woman, him, and several other people were facing the camera, smiling at my kitchen table. There was a box of fireworks off to the side, and the detail and context made it look completely authentic. That's when I genuinely started questioning my own memory and sanity. How could this person have all this evidence if he'd never lived here? I started wondering if I'd somehow blocked out memories of sharing the house with someone, if I was the one having a psychological breakdown. It was especially freaky since I knew for a fact I'd been home on 4th of July,
so the pictures made even less sense. The whole situation was so surreal that I told him I was going to call the police to sort everything out. Not in an antagonistic way, I just didn't know what else to do. I figured they could check records and determine what was going on. But the moment I mentioned calling the cops, the guy's demeanor changed completely. He suddenly became very calm and said he'd wait outside while I made the call. Then, he just walked away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I watched from the window but couldn't see where he went. When police arrived about 10 minutes later, I explained the bizarre situation. They told me to try reaching out to my landlord to contact previous tenants and that I might get answers that way. I had all the required documentation proving I was renting the house, but when I offered to show it, they waved it off. They said whoever had been at my doorstep was probably just having a mental episode, and as long as they were done, I should carry on with my life. I wasn't satisfied with that answer. With my landlord's help, I eventually contacted the previous tenants. My landlord had no idea what had happened either and said he didn't know anyone matching that guy's description. The old tenants were just as confused as I was. They said they'd never lived with anyone matching his description and had lived in the house alone for 3 years before moving out. They had no idea how this stranger could have such detailed knowledge of the house and apparently legitimate photos of himself inside it. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly on edge, but nothing happened. I started thinking maybe it had just been some elaborate scam that failed. That turned out to be wishful thinking. One night, I came home from a night out with friends to find my house completely ransacked. It wasn't like a typical burglary where someone grabs obvious valuables and runs. The place was turned upside down, like someone was looking for something specific. The craziest part was that most of my electronics and other valuable items were still there, despite the rooms they were in being completely trashed. Police found no signs of forced entry, suggesting whoever did it had a copy of my key. Given the timing and connection to the strange incident 2 weeks earlier, it seemed obvious the same person was responsible. Police took things more seriously after that, and so did my landlord. He replaced all the locks immediately and installed additional security measures. The going theory, and the one I believe, is that some crazy person really does think he lives in my house and broke in to look for his personal belongings. That's problematic enough, but it does nothing to explain how he had all that documentation, not to mention copies of my house key. I wish I'd had the sense to look more closely at that lease agreement he showed me, because I might have gotten his name. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. The documents don't bother me that much. All that stuff could have been forged or altered, including the mail. But what freaks me out to my core are the pictures. I have no explanation for them. It's possible they're really old photos with doctored dates, but even then, it doesn't explain how my landlord, who's owned the house his entire life, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested I'm up against something supernatural. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I will say I've had this constant creepy feeling whenever I'm in my own home. I can't rationalize any of this. I just hope that's the end of it.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.